Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to wherever you are joining us. Thank you very much for joining us again for the JCPA's Daily War Room Briefing. I'm here together with my co-host today will be Yoni Ben Menachem, our esteemed fellow. Dan is on his way to America and will be on the West Coast, traveling around at a number of different events there. We're joined today also by our special guest, Colonel Jacques Neriah. And as we've already done previously, what I'll do is I'll just open up with a general update on where we're standing at the moment, developments from the last few days, and then we will get into the different subjects. Today we're going to discuss the subject of the update on the war in general and what it means at this moment for Israel. So here's just our general recap. We're talking about an armed attack that starts on the 7th of October 2023. It's Shabbat, it's Simchat Torah, and over 3,000 terrorists from Gaza infiltrate Israel. Terrorists from Hamas, the PFLP, the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Fatah all storm the border and start a general massacre of the population that lives close to the fence. We're talking about over 30 civilian towns, cities, kibbutzim that are completely overrun, with the terrorists going door to door and basically executing people. We're seeing now that the reports that the terrorists had specific instructions. We're learning this from interrogations of terrorists that are ongoing, specific instructions to go from house to house, specifically taking hostages, specifically taking women, children, and specifically killing and maiming the civilians. We're talking also about a number of army bases that are overrun and the soldiers killed. In that period, or that whole attack was conducted under the cover of rocket fire fired from Gaza. On the morning of the 7th of October, over 3,500 rockets are fired. And in the 13 days, we're now on day 13 of the war. Actually on day 15, I think. I got that wrong, 16. 15. And we're talking about now over 7,000 rockets that have been fired from Gaza into Israel by the different terrorist groups. We're talking about different numbers that have been given for the number of Israelis that have been kidnapped. The numbers are not final at the moment. The highest estimate that I've seen is 250 people. At the moment, messages have been given or notices have been given to 212 families that their loved ones are confirmed to have been kidnapped into Gaza. There are still, of those killed, of the 1,400 people killed, there are still a number of bodies that haven't been identified. And we heard today a truly chilling, I apologize for the graphic description that I'm about to give, a truly graphic message from Zaka, from an organization that's been working to gather the body parts of those killed, that it is possible that we might start having to open. There's a term in Hebrew that's called a kever achim. It means a brother's grave. In English, the term in English isn't the same and doesn't really express that same feeling. It's more of a mass grave. In Hebrew, I think the feeling is more family. It's a kever achim. These are our brothers and sisters that are going to be buried there. Body parts unidentified, bodies unidentified. Truly a horrific situation. The fighting with Gaza is continuing on. The Gazan terrorists firing rockets over Shabbat, over Friday afternoon Shabbat, and already this morning into major civilian areas in Israel, Tel Aviv, Rishon, Bat Yam, Bet Shemesh. All of those areas were subject to attacks in the last 48 hours. The terrorists seem to be showing quite a substantial amount of resourcefulness in that they are able to continue almost endlessly, it would appear, fire rockets, long-range rockets, indiscriminately targeting our civilian population. The good news that we had over the weekend, obviously, was the release of two of the hostages. It's not quite clear exactly what happened there or why they specifically were arrested, were released. That's something that we're still trying to understand and work out. But that was definitely good news that at least two of the hostages were released.
It was a part of a psychological war. And this was a deal done by Qatar and the United States. Israel was not involved in it, even though President Biden asked Prime Minister Netanyahu to allow the opening of the Rafah crossing for humanitarian supply. But this was a deal. It was actually a very successful psychological war stunt of the Hamas, because they wanted to show the American public that they are not so horrible as Israel says, and they are not ISIS, as Israel called them, and that they have humanitarian consideration also. And this was done especially for the American public, because they know that their image now all over the world is of a horrible terror organization, exactly like ISIS.
So within that, exactly right, Yoni, and that understanding that it was more than anything a successful public relations venture for the Hamas and for the terrorists. But on the humanitarian front, we also have to remember that Hamas, despite that little event, and not insignificant event, obviously, in any way, shape, or form, is still holding at least 30 children captive in Gaza, babies through to teenagers, but the study in number at least who are being held in Gaza.
Yes, and yesterday there was another stunt, a PR stunt or psychological stunt. The spokesperson of the military arm of Hamas, he issued a statement that they're willing to release 2 more women hostages, and Israel is refusing to accept them, which is, of course, a big lie. But they're still, they keep playing on this thing that they are a humanitarian organization and so on.
That's unfortunately going to continue on. I think that propaganda war that we're going to continuously see through this initial period, and it's going to accompany us all the way along. Within that, Yoni, as you mentioned before, the humanitarian aid already started flowing through the Rafah border to the Palestinians who have gathered in the southern end of the Gaza Strip. 20 truckloads of materials of goods that were passed over into the hands of. It's not unclear exactly who received the aid and who's going to control the aid. There seemed to be somewhat of a confusion as to who did the security check of the trucks going in, if a security check was done at all.
It was the Egyptians.
The Egyptians said that they did it. Israel said that we had control. The UN reported that there was no security check to ensure, for example, that there were no weapons transferred in the trucks into Gaza. This is something that we're seeing as well.
Excuse me, just one remark, sorry that I'm interrupting. 2 hours ago, the Rafah crossing was opened again, and 17 more trucks came from Egypt into Gaza with humanitarian supply.
Yep, exactly that. That's the developments of today, of the last few hours. So that is what we're seeing on, at least from the Palestinian side of the war. On the Israeli side, the IDF has been expanding its attacks of Hamas targets in the Gaza Strip, particularly in the northern area, in preparation for what could possibly be a ground operation that we would see coming up. In the northern area, over the weekend, in the last 48 hours, there has been continuous exchanges of fire at differing levels, whether it be shootings, rocket fire, missile fire, anti-tank fire. At the same time, Israel has ordered the evacuation of another 14 town cities, villages on that northern front, in preparation for what could possibly be a substantial opening of the war also on the northern front. In Judea and Samaria, we've seen also continuing terrorist attacks and attempts to carry out terrorist attacks. This morning, there was a substantial incident in Jenin, where for the first time in 20 years, IDF helicopters attacked a terror cell that was about to that had already carried out a number of terrorist attacks and was about to carry out another imminent terrorist attack. The uniqueness of this event was that for the first time in 20 years, we attacked the site where they were hiding underneath a mosque, using attack helicopters and not only forces on the ground. On the home front, within the Green Line, whilst there was some fear initially that we would see a recurrence of the events of May 2021, when alongside the attacks of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad from the Gaza Strip, there was also an internal uprising of some of the Israeli Arab population. At the moment, what we are seeing very cautiously this morning, the chief of police said that at the moment what we're seeing is relative calm on the home front from the side of the Israeli Arab population. We have to remember also in this context that some of the victims of that initial Hamas bombing and the terrorist attacks were Israeli Arabs themselves, doctors who were on their way to their shifts who really did save tens of lives before they themselves were killed, families who were caught in the bombing and were killed. So I think the Israeli Arab population also took quite a substantial blow here. And if we recall, Yoni, I'm sure we'll also be able to fill in a little bit more details, but also in the Lebanon war, in the second Lebanon war in 2006, there were also not a small amount of the Hezbollah rockets that actually fell into the Israeli Arab towns, cities and villages there, and not a small amount of casualties as well. So I think the Israeli Arab population, at least for the moment, is not going to be openly showing its hostility to Israel as much as that exists on, again, I don't think we can say that it necessarily is the mainstream. I would like to believe that it is only a fringe element, but that's the updates from the four different areas that we're seeing. Yoni, what can you add on for us?
Yeah, the big test concerning the Israeli Arabs is what will happen on the day that a ground attack will begin, and Israel and the IDF will go into Gaza. We will have to see how they respond when the troops of the IDF will go deeply into Gaza and start fighting and killing the Hamas terrorists in Gaza. This will be the big test of the Israeli Arabs. Will they join, because Hamas keeps calling them to join the campaign against Israel? So we'll have to see what will happen. Just a few remarks, if I may, about the general feeling among the Palestinian street all over, not only Gaza, also in the West Bank and what they call Palestinian diaspora. The Palestinians are very concerned from the ground attack that is expected by the IDF into Gaza. They think, at least they express their fear that Israel is going to transfer the Palestinians in Gaza into Egypt. They fear a new Nakba. This is what they call what happened in 1948. They feel that Israel wants to take.
Yoni, if I may just interrupt for a second, just for our viewers who are unfamiliar with the term. The term Nakba means catastrophe in Arabic, and it's the way that the Palestinians describe the establishment of the state of Israel. They have another term called the Nakhsa, which was the reoccurring catastrophe in 1967. But that term Nakba refers to the catastrophe of the creation of the state of Israel.
Yes, the big disaster for the Palestinian society. I think that Hamas will go down in history as the organization that brought another disaster on the Palestinians, just like the head of the PLO, Yasser Arafat, brought upon them the second Intifada, or as you mentioned, the great Mufti Haj Amin al-Husseini in 1948 brought them the Nakba, this big catastrophe. Now we're talking about Gaza Strip, the massacre that Hamas made in the Israeli communities along the border with Gaza is now creating a big fear among the Palestinians. They are very afraid from an Israeli retaliation, and this is something that they express all over their media, newspapers, and interviews to different media. Egypt and Jordan are now trying to help the Palestinians. The Egyptian president, Sisi, last week he came out publicly against the Israeli intention to evacuate the Palestinians in the north of the Gaza Strip, and in order to thwart this Israeli plan, he called publicly to millions of Egyptians to go out to the streets and demonstrate against the Israeli plan. He also yesterday made a convention in Egypt called the so-called International Peace Conference. And again, in this conference, he attacked the Israeli policy against what he called against the Palestinians. And Jordan also is joining the Egyptian president, King Abdallah, is afraid that after what he calls the transfer of the Palestinians in Gaza Strip to Egypt, there will be another transfer of the Palestinians in the Judea and Samaria, from Judea and Samaria to Jordan, and this will create instability in Jordan and maybe topple his regime. He's very afraid of it. The false claims of the Egyptians and Jordanians and Palestinians, of course, they're saying that Israel wants to reoccupy the Gaza Strip and set up again the settlements in Gush Katif that were evacuated by Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. So President Sisi is very afraid also that since of the military, because of the military operation of the IDF, about 1 million Palestinians will cross the border into Sinai. And this will create a very big problem for the national security of Egypt. He is afraid, concerned that the Palestinians, if they cross the border and go into Sinai, they will join the Muslim Brotherhood movement, which is outlawed in Egypt, and they will start making together terror attacks against the Egyptian regime. The big question is, what will happen after the ground invasion of the IDF will begin into Gaza? There might be a situation that Egypt will lose control and hundreds of thousands of Palestinians will just cross the border by force into Egypt. And this is a big question, what the Egyptian army will do. He cannot stop hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Will they shoot at them? Will they allow them to come in? Will they be willing to have them temporarily living there in Sinai in tents, camps? This is unclear. The bottom line is that the Hamas have managed to create big despair among the Palestinians. They say that they did not recover yet from the Nakba of 1948, and now they're facing a new Nakba. And their big dream to come and live in Israel instead of the Israelis in the 48 territories which are now Israel is this big dream. It disappeared completely, and now they're facing another disaster. This is the big achievement of Hamas.
So maybe from there, Yoni, we can take it on to Jacques. Over on Friday, there were reports that Israel's Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, really spelled out a three-step plan for what he sees happening and Israel sees happening in the Gaza Strip. The first stage being a conquest of the Gaza Strip and really the complete clearing of the Gaza Strip of the terrorists of Hamas and the terrorist organizations. A second phase in which there would be sporadic opposition that would be put down by the IDF. And then the third phase being creating a new governance situation in the Gaza Strip from which there is no more danger posed to Israel's national security. How do you see that playing out, Jacques? the different stages. If you could maybe just walk us through what those stages would actually look like, just with a little bit more flesh.
Well, good afternoon. We have to be very careful in analyzing all the declarations given by Israeli leaders and by Palestinian leaders, by Egyptian leaders, by everybody, because the situation on the ground is different. The situation on the ground is that Israel has finished its preparations for the ground offensive already a week ago. And the question is there any hesitation from the Israeli part? Why is Israel lagging in beginning this operation? And it seems that Israel has two main options that are right now in front of the decision makers in Israel. One is the ground offensive, which you just described, which will cost enormous casualties for Israel, but definitely we will win the battle. But is it necessary at this point? And the second option is to remember what happened in Beirut in 1982, where the IDF just surrounded and put a siege around West Beirut and pounded West Beirut from the midst of June till the midst of August, and at the end of it, Arafat with his troops left Beirut on a ship to Tunis. This might be also a scenario that Israel is considering, and from what I hear, the damage done by the Air Force is such of a magnitude that it might be one of the elements that might help or the decision makers to say, let's wait a little bit and continue. Nevertheless, the waiting period is good for Israel because of American pressure. As Yoni said earlier, the Americans are interested in giving them more time to discuss and to negotiate the issue of the hostages, but this time is limited because Iran, which you did not mention, is right now initiating certain moves on the northern front that might accelerate the decision in Israel either to continue on the southern front or to turn to the northern front. And to what I want to just signify a few things. It's been 4 consecutive days that American bases in Iraq and in Syria are under fire. There have been Iraqi militias have been firing missiles and rockets on American bases, Ain al-Assad, in Konoko, and in Al-Tanaf, 3 main bases, and of course, a development that everybody was totally, surprised and left us lifting an eyebrow is the firing of cruise missiles and drones from Yemen by the Houthis towards Israel. So, and you would say, okay, what is meant by that? What is meant by that? Iran means to signify to the United States to hold Israel and tell Israel not to initiate the ground offensive. And in the meantime, what we see is a deployment of militias, Iraqi militias in southern Lebanon and on the Golan till Daraa, near the Druze, the Druze areas. And these are elements of redeployment of forces and readying forces in order to confront Israel. So this is the time of decision from Hezbollah's point of view is the following. He said, okay, I have a red line. The red line is the ground intrusion. If Israel begins its offensive on the ground, we will expand the war. It will not be limited as it is today on 5 kilometers of each side of the border. We will hit deep inside Israel, and this will happen. This will happen if Israel, of course, begins its ground offensive. But if Israel doesn't begin the ground offensive, is it enough for Hezbollah to do what it's doing now? No. According to more information and more intelligence that came from the area, it seems that Iran has thought that it is the time now, because of the dissension inside the Israeli society, because of the weakness that Israel has shown facing Hezbollah, that it might be the time to attack Israel and to eliminate the presence of the Zionist state. This is where we stand right now. It is a very complicated situation. The Americans are very much against enlarging the confrontation between us and Hamas to a regional confrontation, and Iran is signaling that if we continue on our path, then we will be in the midst of a regional confrontation. This is more or less, I would say, the framework of what we have today. A decision from the Israeli side concerning yes or no ground offensive, or a different option, and then say facing Hezbollah with how long will we will be able to support, to ask, I mean, to feel that we can, without exacerbating our nerves, how much can we accept that Hezbollah just continues its provocations on the north. You know, by the way, they have already more than, they say they have more than 19 fighters killed during the exchanges in Israel, which means that right now the equation that was put by Hezbollah, that an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, is not exactly what's going on the ground, because we're hitting every cell, every possible anti-tank unit that's firing on Israel. And be it on the border, be it 5 kilometers from the border, we are in fact in a situation that has no precedent since July 2006.
So let's, if I may, Jacques, thank you very much. If we could just break that down into the different areas. One of the clear and defined targets and goals set by the government of the State of Israel was the destruction entirely of Hamas. In any case, it will be the end of it, because either by ground invasion or by bombardment, and the Hamas leadership leaving with the terrorists the Gaza Strip, that we have the same conclusion. We arrive to the same goals that the government has set, getting rid of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Do you think that the Israeli population would accept the fact that Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Deif, and the other Hamas leaders who planned, conducted, commanded, and controlled this massacre of Israelis already en masse, the biggest slaughter of Israelis in one day since the Holocaust? Do you think that this is something that the Israeli population, even internally, would accept?
I'm not belittling what happened, but I mean, look at what happened with Arafat. For years, he's been hitting us. We had terrorists entering the Israeli localities and killing kids in the school in Avivim and in Dovev, in other places. And finally, we accepted the fact that he was just he just left Lebanon and left us, and we just forgot about the PLO presence in Lebanon. We might have the same, but remember, we will pursue those responsibles of the massacre, like we did with the massacre in Munich in 1972. It will take time, but we will eliminate each and every one of them. The 20 leaders that are today of Hamas, 4 of them have already been eliminated from the beginning of this war, and the 16 others are in queue waiting for us.
One of the things, I think. Sorry, Yoni, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, just to say that there's a big difference between the PLO and Hamas. Hamas is a jihadic terror organization, and they believe in jihad and fighting to the end. So even if they will be surrounded by the IDF in Gaza and there will be a siege on their tunnels, I don't think that they will give in. They will fight to their death. So eventually this ground attack is inevitable because there's no other way to topple the Hamas regime. You cannot do that by airstrikes. It's not enough because they are hiding underground in the tunnels, and also all the missiles and rockets and drones are underground. So the only way to get rid of it is to go in on a ground attack and destroy these weapons, and also kill the military wing of Hamas leaders. Another thing concerning Iran, actually last week it was already clear that Iran started an attrition war against Israel. They're fighting Israel on all fronts, as Jacques mentioned, also from Yemen for the first time. They launched missiles, cruise missiles and drones that were intercepted by the American army. So this war of attrition is now on a low gear, but they will accelerate when they will be sure that the IDF is beginning the ground attack into Gaza.
Well, without entering in what Yoni said, I believe that we should hear very well what the American administration has told us. Get rid of Hamas, kill Hamas, eliminate Hamas. Yes, do not conquer the Gaza Strip. Do not do that. The don't is also directed towards Israel. And the don't is asking Israel to behave according to its head and not according to the boiling blood and according to anger.
I think, Jacques, that it's impossible to say and to limit Hamas just to the personalities. I think there's the people being sent away, expelled wherever they go. I think there's a difference between the PLO and Yasser Arafat in Beirut when he had to flee Beirut at the end of the siege, and he left all of his assets, and he left, his military assets, and he was sent far away. If we get to a situation, as Yoni mentioned,
he went out from Beirut with all his troops, all his depots, warehouses were given to Hezbollah.
All of Hamas's military assets are underground in Gaza, their rocket stockpiles and everything else. If they are able to maintain even a smattering of that control, of those capabilities. So today we'll see those leaders leave. If we take into account that, and this is also for the Americans, they have to understand, one of the principal leaders of Hamas leading these attacks for the last few years is Salah Harouri, who lives abroad. He has been operating these terror cells both in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria from abroad. Zahir Jabarin, and the list can go on of these terror activists who...
Exactly, so this is what I'm saying. This is
necessarily draw the parallel between Yasser Arafat and the PLO leaving Beirut and the Hamas terrorists leaving Beirut.
This is exactly what I'm saying. You will get rid of Hamas, but the leadership is eating baklava in Istanbul, is having the shawarma in Doha and other places all over the world. Hamas will not disappear. Hamas as a movement will not disappear. What we want is to get rid of the military presence and the governmental presence of Hamas inside Gaza. This is the goal that Israel has in mind. We cannot eliminate at this moment in time Hamas, but we have promised ourselves that each terrorist that participated in the massacre of the 7th of October will be punished, will be killed, and his house will be destroyed. And this is what's happening. Now look at what's happening in Gaza right now. Hamas has lost control of the northern part and the eastern part and maybe the central part of Gaza because of the bombardments that Israel has done by the Air Force and by the artillery. If this continues as it is without stopping, we might be in a situation where an easier invasion would be tolerated. We would have less casualties, certainly, but we have to continue pounding and pounding and pounding until we feel that it is either a solution that might come through a mediator telling us, okay, stop, they will go out, or we will continue, because we know that Salah Harouri, that Hania, that Mash'al, they are not here. They are abroad. They are abroad. So we will not go today to Kuwait, or not to Kuwait, to Qatar, to go and kill them there. It will happen maybe in the future. But right now, what we have to do, what we have to concentrate on, is to get rid of the military presence and the governmental presence of Hamas and restore a situation where we can live in peace, and where we can call all our settlers who were along the border to come back to their homes, because they will not come back to their homes if we still have Hamas on the border.
Once we have Hamas on the border and we allow any type of Gazan presence that can still use the Hamas terror infrastructure, I think it will be probably the worst situation for Israel. And I'm sure that that's something also the Americans understand, that it cannot be that the Gaza Strip will now be extended at least de facto for an extra 10 to 20 kilometers, simply because Israelis can't go back into that area for the fear of this constant and continued terror attacks from the Gaza Strip. And so I think that it has to be understood that a ground operation to a great extent is something which I agree completely. I think that we should continue bombarding Gaza from the air for as long as possible in order to really gain as much control as we can and to fatigue the enemy. That's something which is obviously also covered by international law, and then only as the final and completing goal, go into the Gaza Strip, making sure that it's not only killing the terrorists, it's also de-arming that entire infrastructure that had developed under the control and under the guidance of Hamas, and that's something which has to be done, I fear, on a predominantly almost house-to-house basis. Definitely getting into that whole Hamas metro, as they call it, the whole underground city and whole underground infrastructure that Hamas has, sometimes 20 and 30 meters under the ground, where they have whole installations which we can't get to from the air, and we will have no choice but to go in. And then there's also obviously the question of the hostages, which is something which also is cannot be solved from the air at the moment. At the moment, Israel is being forced to break what I would have suggested should have been the equation and should have been Israel's equation from the start: humanitarian aid in response for humanitarian treatment, i.e. we, Israel, will allow humanitarian aid to flow to the innocent Gazans on condition that the terrorists release all of the hostages, including the bodies of Hadar Goldin and Oron Shaul, and then only after that we can rediscuss anything else. But once we've already breached this equation of one-sided humanitarian aid going only to the Palestinians, where Israel is left just on the side again giving, and where we have our own 400,000 refugees, Israeli refugees, wandering around the country from around the Gaza Strip, from the middle of the country, from Sderot, from all of the northern area. I think that that's something which hasn't been necessarily discussed or taken into account to the fullest extent.
Yes, allow me to add something concerning Egypt and the other Arab regimes. I think that the Egyptians behind the closed doors are hoping that Israel finishes the job with Hamas. Let us not forget that Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brethren, and this is a dire enemy of Egypt, a dire enemy of the Kingdom of Jordan, of Saudi Arabia, and the Arab Emirates. And this is the Hamas as a body politic is not accepted by the Arab world, and the Arab world would be more than pleased to see it disappear.
But they don't seem to be differentiating between Hamas and the Palestinian people. Is that because, as we've said here before, there's massive support among the Palestinian people in Gaza specifically for Hamas? Is that the reticence? Is that
but you know that you can read already between the lines all over the Arab world that what sort of disaster Hamas has brought on the Palestinian people. Seeing the pictures from Gaza, I said, this is what you wanted, to the destruction of Gaza, the turning Gaza into new refugees and put them living in tents. This criticism is being now formulated and heard in the Arab world.
So how would that look like? And just going up to the northern arena, Israel has promised the same thing, and Prime Minister Netanyahu stressed it again this morning, that if Hezbollah were to enter the war, given a ground operation or for any other reason, then Israel will do the same to Lebanon as it's done to Gaza. And
I ask myself a question: why did Benjamin Netanyahu stop a preemptive attack against Hezbollah in Lebanon? Why did he not allow the military establishment and security establishment, which came with the idea, and said, okay, we have to hit the heavy missiles like we did in 2006 in Lebanon.
Because President Biden objected.
We know the President Biden didn't want also us to attack, but I mean, this was an option that we have lost right now. I don't know if this will come back during the campaign. The idea the idea is the following, that this war cannot end with Hezbollah on our border as it is today. We have to change the equation. We have to reestablish the deterrence between us and Hezbollah, and this cannot continue as it is today, because the settlers, the inhabitants of all the 28 settlements and the localities along the border have said it very plainly and openly. We will not come back under fire.
I think, Yanni, that it's important, and Jacques, to understand, at least in my take of it, as small as my opinion may be, I think that the position of the Americans regarding an Israeli preemptive strike against Hezbollah is simply the height of immorality. What Joe Biden really is saying to the Israeli public is that you have to suffer the first blow of Hezbollah, you have to suffer hundreds, potentially thousands of Israelis killed before you can dare defend yourselves. I think the immorality of that statement just shouts out, and it's something which I really do fear that the Israeli government has listened to and is heeding too much, because I think, as far as I know, Hezbollah is a much more powerful enemy than Hamas. They have somewhere in the region, from the last updates that I saw, somewhere in the region of 180,000 rockets aimed towards Israel.
With some of them with chemical warheads produced in Syria.
And long range exact weaponry, exact weapons that could target almost everywhere in Israel. That's what Israel's been having, what we in Israel called the Mabam, the war between wars that's been going on for the last probably 15 years, trying to prevent Iranian technology and missiles going to Hezbollah through Syria. And we would constantly hear of these attacks on missiles being transferred through Syria. And this is something which it appears that the American administration expects us to suck up instead of going for that preemptive strike. Is that something which you've heard, Jacques? Is that something which is could be a reasonable request?
What you said is the translation of the American veto concerning the preemptive attack on the Hamas targets. Now, look, I mean, Lebanon is being prepared as a front, and we are seeing it in front of our eyes. Kani, the head of the Quds division, is now in Beirut, conversing with the Palestinian factions and with Hezbollah on the next steps in the confrontation with Israel. We've seen militias from Iraq coming and deploying in South Lebanon. We've seen weapons coming and redeploying in the Golan Heights. We are waiting. We are waiting for what? As you said, for the first blow, and the first blow will be lethal. It will cost us a lot of lives before we re-establish first the balance, and then we hit back.
I think that Israel had no choice now but to comply with the request of President Biden, and to concentrate on the war in Gaza against Hamas and first destroy Hamas. We can still launch a preemptive strike on Hezbollah whenever we want. And I'm sure that this is still something that is open for Israel. But right now we are dependent on the Americans for ammunition, for diplomatic support, and I think that Netanyahu had to agree to the request of President Biden, and to keep the good relationship and American support until we will reach the goal of toppling the Hamas rule in Gaza Strip. If the situation will change and there will be indications that the Hezbollah is planning to open a big front against Israel on the day that the big invasion to the Gaza Strip will start. I'm sure that Israel will launch a preemptive strike on Hezbollah also. It is still possible, and the option is still there.
That's something which I would hope. No, let's just remind our viewers that if you have questions, you should put them in the chat. We're almost getting ready to wrap up, but we have now just two questions that came in. I think both of them I would like to address to both of you, both of them from anonymous attendees. The first one is, what is Israel doing to counter the shift in sentiment to the Palestinian suffering? This is something which obviously on the first days, there was an outpouring of international empathy, emotion for Israel and for the slaughtered Jews. But that seems now to be being replaced with the pictures of Palestinian children wandering around the specifically chosen sites that have been blown up to get great propaganda pictures. Is there any way that we can win that propaganda war, Jack?
We have to be very cruel towards ourselves. We have to publish again and again the horrific pictures of what happened on the 7th of October. This is the main means of convincing people that we are treating, we have to deal with animals, we have to deal with monsters, we have to deal with beasts. This is what it is all about, and we have to put away our feeling of sorrow. And no, this is not moral to show pictures. Part of pictures, babies have been decapitated, women have been raped and killed, and people who just surrender were put on chairs and executed at point blank. This is what happened. This is what happened. This is what we have to repeat all the time. We are the victims. We are not the butchers.
I think that this game is always like that. When Israel is attacked, we are the underdog only for 2-3 days, and then the narrative changes, and the Palestinians become the underdog again, even though they are the aggressive, even though they are the one who slaughtered the Israelis. And I think that what is needed, I don't know if we can change the picture, but I think that we have to launch a big campaign of Asbara. What is happening is not enough. I think that every individual in Israel who knows the English language and other languages, the Arabic language and so on, should go on the social networks and do the best he can, because there is a massive Palestinian propaganda campaign, and we have to confront it in any way which is possible.
I think that's exactly right. I personally believe that at least living part of my life on social media and seeing that developing situation, I think that and also with my connection to the diaspora and the Jewish communities around the world, I think that we're really seeing that. I think the events in the United States over the weekend with the murder of a leader of a community in Detroit was something that was also horrific and traumatic for also for the Jewish community. But on the other hand, there's also been that expression of I think ongoing support. But you're right, Yoni and Jacques, we just need to keep on showing those pictures to show what exactly we're fighting and why we're fighting them. I don't think there's any other way to deal with it.
Well, I only just have as a conclusion to say that we have to repeat in our mind and ourselves all what Golda Meir told Senator Biden when he was first visiting Israel. We have a secret weapon. We have no other choice.
We have nowhere else to go, and maybe we'll just a concluding comment from Yoni afterwards. I think these days we're finding many of the quotes of Golda Meir so relevant for our current situation. For example, when she said that the wars with our Arab neighbors will end when they love our children more than they hate us, or we can possibly forgive the Palestinians for at some stage down the line for killing our children, but we can never forgive them for causing us to kill their children. I think the words of Golda Meir these days, I think, are.
He also said that if the Arabs, she also said that if the Arabs will put down their weapons, there will be no war. But if Israel put down its weapon, there will be no Israel.
And I think that that's unfortunately where we're being pushed into this question of Israel must wait, Israel must sit on its hands and wait for attacks before it has the legitimacy to attack. That is not something which I think we can even tolerate. Just one last question before we wrap it up. Why not also question the pictures of children walking around the bombarded sites and saying these children are not living in these buildings, they're for propaganda? That's a question for Michael. I can tell you what I saw this morning. I follow a Twitter user who often publishes pictures and videos of the alternate Gaza that we don't see. She published a video last night of the Gaza Strip, of Gaza City, that no one else is showing on the international media. What we tend to see on the international media is pictures of buildings blown out and children often dirty, wandering around these blown up sites. Whereas the reality is that there are extensive parts still of Gaza, of the Gaza City, where they have showrooms for luxury cars and sports cars that haven't been hit, entire showrooms that have big glass fronts, so that everyone can see in to see the cars that haven't been touched at all. And I would invite really everyone who's watching to go onto the social media and to see just how many other pictures there are of the alternate Gaza that we're not seeing, in order to understand the wider picture. I think for today, gentlemen, if with your permission, we can wrap it up, and we hope for really a quieter period of safety for Israel. We'll see what the next 24 hours has to offer for us and then brings us. We'll be back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock in the afternoon Israel time with our daily daily briefing for tomorrow. As Dan would always say, in order to do these briefings, we also need the support and really the partnership of everyone who can. You can go and donate to the JCPA, become partners in the work that we're doing in order to also present Israel's position and present the analysis that we are providing on a daily basis. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and good night, good evening, good morning, wherever you are around the world. Thanks very much.